He had it all: a high-paying job, a beautiful apartment overlooking the skyline, a calendar packed with social dinners, deadlines, and weekend getaways. From the outside, he was living the modern dream, but one evening, as he sat quietly in his living room, scrolling mindlessly through endless notifications, a strange emptiness crept in. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, it was honest, and it asked a simple question: why am I doing all this? At first, he brushed it aside. Maybe he was just tired. Maybe he needed a vacation, but the question kept returning, this time not from the screen, or the boss, or the bank. It was coming from somewhere deeper, somewhere closer to the heart. Contrary to popular belief, spiritual awakening doesn't always begin in temples or on mountain tops. Sometimes, it starts in a traffic jam, sometimes, in the middle of a business meeting, and sometimes in the deafening silence of a life that looks full but feels empty. You see, most people don't come to Buddhism because they're curious. They come because something within them hurts or longs or aches. They come not seeking religion, but relief, not answers, but a deeper question, and that's where Buddhism quietly enters, not as a dogma, but as a mirror that gently reflects, you've been looking outside. But have you ever looked within? You might think practicing Buddhism starts with chanting, or sitting in lotus pose for an hour a day, but it doesn't. It starts here, with a pause, with a breath, with that tiny whisper in the heart that says, there must be a simpler, saner way to live. That whisper is the beginning of the path. That discomfort isn't a problem, it's the invitation. The Buddha himself didn't begin by trying to change the world. He began with a deep question: is there a way out of suffering? So if you've ever felt like you're tired but don't know why, you're chasing success but not feeling fulfilled, you're surrounded by people but still feel alone, then this path may be for you. And no, you don't have to convert. You don't have to shave your head or leave your life behind. You just have to listen to that quiet question, because that question is a door, and Buddhism is what happens when you walk through it. Modern life is fast, convenient, technological. We have endless tools to connect, and yet, we often feel disconnected from ourselves. We know how to upgrade our phones, our cars, our jobs, but few know how to upgrade their inner peace. We learn to hustle, but we rarely learn to be still. And deep down, something in us begins to ache, not for more, but for less noise, less stress, less pretending. That ache is not weakness, it's wisdom in disguise. It's the part of you that remembers there is a different way to live. Siddhartha Gautama, the man who became the Buddha, was a prince. He had luxury, status, comfort, but when he saw old age, sickness, and death, something shattered inside. How can I enjoy life when it's all so fragile, so temporary? He walked away from the palace, not out of rejection, but out of seeking, not because he hated life, but because he wanted to understand it. And that is where the path of Buddhism begins, not in rejection, but in inquiry, not in belief, but in awareness. If you're watching this, if you're still reading these words, then the path has already begun, because real practice starts not when you chant in a temple, but when you start questioning deeply, when you stop asking, what do I want next? And start asking, what am I really seeking? That is the moment the practice of Buddhism truly begins, not with a guru, not with robes, but with you, here, now, breathing, wondering, ready. A young traveler once visited a temple in Thailand. He bowed, lit incense, and took photos with a monk. Then he asked the guide, "So this is Buddhism?" The guide smiled gently, "Not really. This is just the surface." The tourist frowned. "Then what is Buddhism?" The guide pointed at his own heart. Understanding this. When people hear Buddhism, they often picture monks in saffron robes, statues, incense, and chanting, silence and solitude. But Buddhism is not a religion of robes and rituals. It's a path of awakening, a deep training of the mind. Temples are like tools, helpful, but not the essence. Like how owning a yoga mat doesn't mean you practice yoga. Let's clear up a major myth. The Buddha is not a god. He never claimed divinity, he was a human being who awakened to the nature of reality, and he taught others to do the same. Don't believe in anything, even what I say, without testing it yourself. The Buddha, Kalama Sutta, Buddhism invites you to see for yourself, not to blindly believe. You don't have to believe in anything supernatural to benefit from Buddhism. It's more like mental training than a religion. If you observe your thoughts, reflect on suffering, let go of anger and craving, practice kindness and awareness, you are already walking the path. As Zen master Thich Nhat Hanh said, Buddhism is not a religion. It is a practice. A way of being awake. At its heart, Buddhism rests on 4 observations. 1. Life has suffering, not always dramatic, but subtle discontent, restlessness, craving. 2. Suffering has a cause, clinging, craving, resisting what is. 3. Suffering can end, peace is possible. 4. There's a path to that peace, the Eightfold Path. These truths are not doctrines to memorize, they are maps for real, lived experience. It's not mystical. It's deeply practical. 1. Right view, seeing clearly. 2. Right intention, acting with kindness. 3. Right speech, speaking truthfully. 4. Right action, living ethically. 5. Right livelihood, earning honestly. 6. Right effort, letting go of unwholesome habits. 7. Right mindfulness, being present in each moment. 8. Right concentration, training the mind through meditation. You don't need to master them all to begin, even one sincere step transforms the way you live. Think Buddhism can't be practiced without temples. Think again, washing dishes mindfully is a form of meditation. Choosing compassion over reaction is a spiritual act. You can be a Buddhist, in traffic, at work, during a difficult conversation. Wherever there is awareness, there is practice. So why do monks chant or bow? Rituals help focus the mind and open the heart, but they are means, not the end. The real Buddhism isn't what's outside, it's the inner shift from craving to clarity. Let's clear the air. You don't need to be religious. You don't need to meditate for hours, you don't need to leave your job or home. All you need is the willingness to look inward, gently and honestly. At its core, Buddhism is about liberation, from compulsive thinking, from being trapped by emotions. From the cycle of craving and regret, it offers tools, not dogmas, to wake up to the life you're already living, and you don't have to change your beliefs to begin, you just need to pay attention. There's a moment in life that's hard to describe, but you know it when it arrives. Maybe it's a breakup that leaves you hollow, a job that drains your spirit, a loved one's death that shakes the meaning out of everything. It feels like the world stops making sense. You sit alone and whisper, there has to be more than this. That whisper is not weakness, that whisper is the doorway. Before he became the Buddha, Siddhartha was a prince. He had luxury, pleasure, status. Everything the world says will make us happy. But then, on a quiet journey outside the palace, he saw 4 things. 1. An old man. 2. A sick man. 3. A corpse. 4. A serene monk. For the first time, he saw that suffering is inevitable. No matter how rich or powerful you are, that shock became the spark that lit his path. Why do we live, if it all ends in suffering? That wasn't despair, that was the beginning of wisdom. Let's be honest, we don't come to Buddhism because everything is perfect. We come because something is missing, or hurting, or confusing, and that's okay. In fact, that's where every great spiritual journey begins. Not in answers, but in questions. Most of us run from suffering. We distract ourselves with screens, food, busy schedules, numbing habits. But Buddhism teaches something radical. Don't run from your suffering. Sit with it. Listen to it. Let it teach you. Pain becomes a teacher when we stop turning away. Think of suffering like a locked door. It's heavy, ugly. You'd rather avoid it, but what if you had the key? What if, instead of running from the door, you opened it, and behind it was clarity, peace, even freedom? This is the Buddhist path, not the removal of pain, but the transformation of it. Take Maya. A young professional in New York. She had everything, a good salary, a penthouse view, a social life, but inside, she felt empty. Anxious. Like something essential was missing. One night, scrolling through YouTube, she found a video, "You Are Not Your Thoughts," a Buddhist teaching. That 5-minute clip made her stop, breathe, and feel. That night, she didn't pour a drink. She sat in silence. It was uncomfortable. But it was also the most real she'd felt in years, and that's where her path began, not with a retreat, but with recognizing her suffering without judgment. In Buddhism, the first thing the Buddha taught was dukkha. It's often translated as suffering, but it also means unsatisfactoriness, instability, the feeling that something is just off. It's not just pain. It's the subtle ache we all carry, wanting more, fearing loss, struggling to feel enough. And this is not a pessimistic view, it's honest. It's saying, let's stop pretending things are perfect, so we can actually understand life. We often think we're alone in our struggles, but when we look deeper, we realize something powerful. Everyone is carrying something. The confident CEO hides grief, the smiling friend battles anxiety, the quiet neighbor carries regret. The Buddhist path isn't about escaping suffering, it's about realizing that we're not alone in it. This realization builds compassion, not just for ourselves, but for the world. When we meet our suffering with mindfulness, something changes. We learn that craving creates tension, that resistance creates more pain, that accepting things as they are brings peace. Instead of reacting, we respond. Instead of drowning, we float. It's not magic. It's training, and every time we pause, breathe, and see clearly, we take one more step on the path. Instead of asking, "Why am I suffering?" Buddhism invites us to ask, "What is this suffering showing me?" That's a shift from victimhood to awakening. So, you've read the quotes, watched the videos, felt something stir inside. Maybe you've whispered to yourself, "Yes, this is it. This is what I've been looking for." But then comes the hard part. Now what? Where do you go from inspiration to transformation? Because Buddhism isn't just a philosophy to admire, it's a path to walk, and the first step is much simpler and closer than you think. Let's debunk something early. You don't need to shave your head, to chant in a foreign language, to fly to a monastery in the Himalayas. Those are tools, not requirements. The real temple, it's built in your awareness. And it begins where you are, right now. There's a famous Zen story of a layperson who visited a monastery and asked a master, "What do you teach here?" The master replied, "We eat when hungry. We sleep when tired. We sweep the floor when it's dirty." Confused, the visitor asked, "Isn't that what everyone does?" The master smiled, "No. Most people eat without tasting, sleep with a racing mind, and clean while dreaming of something else. That's the secret. Mindfulness transforms the ordinary into the sacred. Step 1. Sit with yourself. Meditation. You don't need incense or a shrine, just a quiet space, your breath, and willingness. Start with 5 minutes a day. 1. Sit comfortably, on a chair or cushion. 2. Close your eyes. 3. Breathe naturally. 4. Watch your breath come and go. 5. When thoughts come, don't judge, just return to your breath. You'll fail, get distracted, feel bored. Good, that's the practice. You don't meditate to get good at meditation. You meditate to get good at life. Step 2. Observe, don't react. Mindfulness in daily life. The real meditation happens not on the cushion, but in traffic, in arguments, in long meetings. Practice noticing, when your anger rises, when your mind starts comparing, when craving creeps in. Just notice, name it, return to the present. This turns everyday life into your training ground. Step 3. Live ethically, but not perfectly. Buddhism teaches the 5 precepts, not as commandments, but as practices to reduce suffering. Avoid killing, including harsh speech, avoid stealing, avoid sexual misconduct, avoid false speech, avoid intoxicants that cloud the mind. You don't need to be perfect, start where you are. Even becoming aware of how you speak, consume, and treat others is already transformation. Step 4. Listen to the Dharma. The Buddha said, just as the ocean has one taste, the taste of salt, so too does the Dharma have one taste, the taste of freedom. Make it a habit, listen to a short Dharma talk each morning, read a passage from Thich Nhat Hanh, Ajahn Chah, or Pema Chodron. Let truth drip into your day like water onto a stone. Over time, it softens you. Shapes you, without you even noticing. Step 5, don't walk alone, find a Sangha. You don't need to convert, but you do need community. A Sangha, spiritual community, can be a meditation group in your city, an online forum, a few friends who practice with you, even comment sections where real dialogue happens. Why? Because when you fall, and you will, they help you stand again. The next Buddha may not be an individual, but a community practicing understanding and loving kindness. Thich Nhat Hanh, Jamie, 32, had suffered from anxiety for years. She stumbled onto a video titled How to Let Go, Buddhist Insight. That night, she didn't start a shrine, she just sat with her tea and listened to her breath for 10 minutes. She did that every day for 2 weeks. She didn't become instantly peaceful, but one day, when someone cut her off in traffic, she noticed her anger rise, and didn't act on it. That moment, she realized, she had begun. It's not about labels. You don't need to call yourself a Buddhist to live these truths. Practicing Buddhism means being awake, being kind, being honest, being curious about your mind. It means turning everyday moments into opportunities to suffer less, love more, and understand deeper. There is no finish line. There's only this breath, this step, this choice. You can't fail. You can only forget and remember again, and every time you remember, you come home. You've taken the first steps, you've meditated, observed your thoughts, maybe even tasted moments of silence, but then the real world calls back. Your boss demands results, your partner misunderstands you, your bills pile up. You ask, how can I practice Buddhism while living in the modern world? The answer, don't escape life, live it, but mindfully. That is the heart of the middle way. In Tokyo, there's a man named Ryo. He's a software engineer by day, a caretaker for his elderly parents by night, but every morning, before the sun rises, Ryo sits in silence for 15 minutes. No incense. No robe. Just breath and awareness. On the subway, he watches the crowd with compassion. When frustrated, he softly whispers, "This too will pass." He doesn't wear beads or preach Dharma, but his presence. Calm. Kind. Steady. Ryo is a monk, not by title, but by lived awareness. We often think spirituality happens outside the workplace, but Buddhism teaches, there is no separate life. Mindful work means, focusing fully on one task at a time, breathing between emails instead of reacting, pausing before speaking, especially in stress, asking, am I adding to suffering or reducing it right now? When you bring presence into meetings, ethics into decisions, and equanimity into stress, you're practicing the path. Your work becomes your temple. Before enlightenment, chop wood. Carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. Relationships are where our deepest attachments, expectations, and egos arise, and that's why they're perfect for practice. Buddhism in relationships doesn't mean being passive, it means being deeply present, honest, and compassionate. Practice deep listening without needing to fix or control, speaking truth without violence, recognizing impermanence. People change, emotions flow. Letting go of ownership. No one belongs to you. Each time you choose understanding over reaction, compassion over control, you awaken the Buddha in you. At the core of the Buddha's teachings is the middle way. After living in luxury and then extreme asceticism, the Buddha discovered, neither indulgence nor repression brings peace. The middle way is about engaging fully with life, without being attached to outcomes. Eat, love, work, create, but do it with awareness, and without clinging. Let go of the rope, not because life is bad, but because clinging makes it unbearable. In this digital age, our greatest suffering often lives in our pocket. Endless scrolling, comparison, distraction. But your phone can also be a Dharma bell. Try this. Before unlocking it, take one mindful breath. Set your lock screen to a reminder. Be here now. Use mindfulness apps. Listen to Dharma talks on your commute, turn moments of scrolling into moments of waking up. The point isn't to reject technology, it's to reclaim your attention. Tara, a single mother and teacher, had been practicing mindfulness for just 3 weeks. One night, her teenage son slammed the door and shouted, "You don't understand me." Old Tara would have shouted back. But this time, she paused, breathed, noticed her anger. Like a wave rising, she said calmly, "You might be right. Let's talk when we've both cooled down." That pause, small as it seemed, broke a lifetime of patterns. That was her moment of awakening. Sometimes we think Buddhism is only about suffering, but joy, simple, quiet joy, is part of the path too. Enjoy the scent of your coffee, a child's laughter, the sky turning pink at dusk. Feel them fully, hold them lightly. As Zen master Shunryu Suzuki said, when you do something, you should burn yourself up completely, like a good bonfire, leaving no trace of yourself. That's not drama, that's devotion. You don't need to label yourself. Living Buddhism simply means being awake to this moment, choosing kindness over ego, letting go when you want to control, loving without clinging, working with full presence, falling, then beginning again, gently. It's not about being Zen. It's about being real. There's no need to retreat from life, because the path is not far away. It's here, in your conversations, in your stress, in your quiet cup of tea. This is where the Dharma lives. This is where you live it. After days, months, or years on the path, a natural question arises: what actually changes inside me? Is Buddhism about becoming someone new, or is it about unveiling who you truly are beneath the layers of stress, fear, and illusion? The answer is both, and more. Imagine a lump of clay. At first, it's rough, formless, filled with impurities. Through the potter's hands, kneading, shaping, firing, it slowly becomes a beautiful pot. Your mind and heart are like that clay. Practice is the potter's hand. Each moment of mindfulness, kindness, and insight shapes you, refines you, clears you. Don't expect fireworks. Real change in Buddhism is like water wearing down stone. The sudden rush of anger softens into a gentle wave of patience, the heavy weight of anxiety lightens into calm awareness, the blinding ego dims to reveal humility and openness. It's gradual, it's consistent, and it's profound. Key fruits of practice: increased awareness. You notice your thoughts and emotions as they arise. Without being swept away, awareness becomes a lighthouse, guiding you through storms. Compassion deepens, not just for others, but for yourself. You learn to hold your own flaws and struggles with kindness. Detachment from craving, the endless chasing after more success, approval, possessions, loosens its grip. You find contentment in simplicity, equanimity. Life's ups and downs no longer toss you like a ship in a storm. You stand steady, balanced, like a mountain. Joy and peace, not dependent on external conditions, but blossoming from within. Maya, a young lawyer, used to be consumed by stress. After a year of regular meditation and ethical living, her colleagues noticed something different. She smiled more, genuinely. She listened deeply. She was calmer, more patient under pressure. One day, during a tense negotiation, Maya caught herself tightening her fists. Instead of reacting, she breathed. The tension dissolved. That moment was the fruit of her practice. You may still have struggles. You may still feel pain. But what shifts is your relationship to those struggles. Instead of "I am my anger," you begin to see anger as present. Instead of "I am a victim of stress," you realize stress is a passing cloud. This shift is liberation. Buddhism doesn't promise perfection. It promises freedom from suffering through understanding. Each moment of practice is a victory. Each time you come back to mindfulness after distraction is a step forward. The fruits of practice are the sweet harvest of seeds planted. Sometimes, the harvest seems distant, but your commitment nourishes growth. Keep watering your practice with patience, courage, and love. Ask yourself, what changes do I see within? Celebrate the small victories. Recognize the inner blossoming. You are on the path, and the path is unfolding beautifully inside you. If you've been listening closely to this journey, here's what you might have realized. There is no perfect moment to start. There is only this moment, right now, Whether you are young or old, busy or free, curious or skeptical, Buddhism welcomes you as you are. There is no prerequisite, no test, no gatekeeper, just a simple invitation: just begin. One of the greatest teachings is this paradox: the path isn't about arriving somewhere else, it's about learning to walk fully here, fully now, in every breath, every step, every heartbeat. There is the whole journey. Wherever you are, be there totally. Eckhart Tolle, a novice, once asked a Zen master, "Master, when will I attain enlightenment?" The master smiled and said, "When you stop looking for it. Enlightenment is not a distant goal to chase, it's the natural clarity you discover when you stop running after illusions." Starting your practice means letting go of many expectations, that you must be perfect, that progress is linear, that you must have answers. Instead, be curious, be gentle, be patient with yourself. The Buddha himself said, "I teach one thing and one thing only, suffering and the end of suffering." The practice is simply to come back to this truth again and again. Small steps lead to big transformation. A few minutes of mindful breathing, a kind word spoken instead of harshness, an honest moment of self-reflection. Each is a doorway, each is a key. No one else can walk your path for you. The teachings are like a lamp. You carry the flame. Sometimes it flickers, sometimes it shines bright, but it's always yours. You don't need to become someone else. You are already whole. The Buddha nature is within you. Every act of kindness, every moment of awareness, every step on this path is a blossoming of that truth. As the great Thich Nhat Hanh said, "You are here to awaken from your illusion of separateness." So, take a breath, take a step, begin your practice. Wherever you are, just as you are, the journey is your destination, and it begins now. If this message resonated with you, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel for more insights on Buddhist teachings and practical wisdom for daily life. Leave a comment below. What is your first step going to be? Let's walk this path together.